Humanity's greatest arrogance isn't thinking we are the center of the universe, but rather the naive delusion that we are the first owners of this planet. Look at Sumer, the cradle of civilization that textbooks still sing praises about. According to common sense, civilization must crawl slowly, from banging rocks together to wielding bronze, then iron. But no. In southern Iraq, under layers of dust 5,000 years thick, civilization did not evolve. It landed. Boom. Cuneiform writing appeared complete from day one, a base 60 mathematical system so complex it defined the very watch you are wearing, and architecture as precise as if it were printed from a 3D machine. Those 19th century archaeologists hauled their shovels out to dig, thinking they would find the crude scribbles of prehistoric men, but instead they stumbled upon a massive library that had no school. Those clay tablets didn't record the process of human learning. They recorded memory. Memory of whom? Of those with wings, skin glowing like bronze, and fish-human hybrids stepping up from the sea to teach us how to grow rice. They didn't call it mythology. They recorded it as meticulously as a biological report. The Sumerian king list details dynasties lasting tens of thousands of years before the Great Flood, where humans were not the authors of history, but merely an alternative plan, a late-born species created to clean up the mess of those who came before. If the monsters in legends were actually flesh and blood teachers, and we are just the bunch of students taking over a classroom that has been laid to waste, then ultimately, what is truly lying beneath those layers of sand? Pull your chair closer. Don't let the sound of the desert wind deceive your hearing. Welcome back to Dark History. I am Zorro, and today we are going to expose the forgotten last will and testament of humanity. People often say, history is written by the victors. But that is the sweetest lie your history teacher ever taught you. The truth? History is a crime scene. And at this crime scene named Earth, we, the human race, are neither the detectives nor the victims. We are the evidence. Join me in going back 5,000 years to southern Iraq, where the 49 degrees Celsius heat doesn't just melt ice cream. It's strong enough to roast your very pride. Beneath that thick, dusty sand, fired clay tablets lie silent. They aren't sleeping. They are waiting. Waiting to whisper into your ear a secret that both religion and mainstream science want to silence. What if the first chapter of humanity wasn't written about humanity at all? Go back to the 1840s. The gentlemen archaeologists of Europe, with their trimmed mustaches and egos bigger than Big Ben, flocked to Mesopotamia. They brought shovels, and a faith so naive it was pitiful. In their heads they thought, digging down this deep, we'll surely only find the crude drawings of prehistoric people, like I see cow, I hit cow sort of stuff. But guess what? Mesopotamia gave them a shock. They didn't find primitive beginnings. They found a civilization that was already fully ripe. The Sumerians, appearing around 3,500 BC. No toddler phase. No evolution from thatched huts to brick houses. Boom, they appeared. The cuneiform writing system? Perfect from day one. Grammar so complex it makes modern linguistics students scream. The mathematical system? Have you ever asked yourself why an hour has 60 minutes, a minute has 60 seconds, and a circle has 360 degrees? Thank the Sumerians. They installed the rhythm of time for this entire world 5 millennia ago. It's as if this civilization didn't evolve at all. It was downloaded, a massive copy-paste from the void into the middle of the desert. Scholars have spent over 100 years trying to explain this absurdity. Civilizations must stumble, must grope in the dark. But the Sumerians didn't. They knew urban planning, astronomy, and law the moment they were born. But that's not even the scariest part. The thing that keeps me awake at night is what they wrote. If it were you, what would you write first? Brag about yourself, right? The Sumerians didn't. Their very first lines were dedicated to describing the others. Imagine holding one of those rough clay tablets in your hand. Ancient fingers pressed hard into this, not to tell fairy tales to put children to sleep. They were recording minutes. They described creatures stepping out of the shadows. Some had giant wings, some were covered in fish scales, some possessed skin that glowed like molten copper, some rose from the Abzu, the pitch-black abyss at the bottom of the ocean. They called them the Anunnaki, the Abkalu. The odd thing is, the Sumerians didn't use flowery language. They didn't say things like, the gods radiated brilliant halos. No. They recorded with the cold detachment of a forensic pathologist. They recorded the size, physical characteristics, and even the dietary needs of these creatures. One tablet tells of the 7 sages, half man, half fish, coming up from the sea to teach humans how to plant rice and write. Another lists the kings who ruled before the Great Flood. Do you know how long their dynasties lasted? A few decades? No. Tens of thousands of years. And then we have the story of creation. Forget the Garden of Eden. The Sumerian version is much more brutal. In the Atrahasis epic, humans were not created out of love. We were created because of laziness. The lower-tier gods went on strike because the labor was too hard. And what was the solution of the management, the high-tier gods? Create a new species to do this work for us. The god Enki proposed mixing clay with the blood of a slain god to create biological workers. Sound familiar? It doesn't sound like magic. It sounds like genetic engineering. We, according to the Sumerians, are biological machines designed to serve. Many scientists, people who always want everything to fit neatly into textbooks, will tell you, oh, Zorro, that's just a metaphor. It's symbolic of society. Symbolic? So why does a symbol need to eat, drink, and bleed? Why does a symbol have children with humans? Go to the Louvre, look at the stone steles. You will see bird-headed figures standing twice as tall as humans. Go to the British Museum. Look at the tiny cylinder seals, fish hybrid creatures standing and teaching humans who are kneeling. Why kneeling? That is not the posture of a worshiper. That is the posture of a subordinate, of a pet. Before the Iraq Museum was looted in 2003, a suspiciously convenient coincidence, right? It was full of statues of humanoid creatures with reptilian features, snake eyes, scaly skin, holding human infants. Art experts had to admit their body proportions were incredibly biologically accurate. Muscles, joints, everything was logical. If the Sumerians were just making it up, they were the greatest liars in history. They fabricated the same story, drew the same grotesque shapes for 2,000 years without deviating a single stroke. The truth lies here. These clay tablets are not Bibles. They are suicide notes of a lost world. They scream in our faces, "You arrived late. This world had owners before you were born." But what happened to those owners? Why did they disappear, leaving us stranded amidst the ruins? Water. It brings life, right? That's what we are taught. But in the memory of the Sumerians, water is not a gentle mother. Water is the eraser. It is the tool to clean up the crime scene. Almost every ancient culture on this earth has a story about the Great Flood. The Bible has Noah, the Mayans have Huracan, India has Manu. Modern scientists usually shrug, Oh, it was probably just ice melting at the end of the Ice Age, just local flooding. But the Sumerians don't talk about local flooding. They talk about a global reset button, a full stop for the old world and a painful beginning for the new one. And guess what? They left geological proof. Let's go back to the 1920s. Sir Leonard Woolley, a British archaeologist with a cool head, was digging at Ur, one of Sumer's most important cities. He dug deep into the earth, piercing through thousands of years of history. Everything was normal, broken pottery, bones, bricks, until he hit something strange. A layer of perfectly clean clay, 8 feet thick. That's about 2.5 meters. 2.5 meters of settled mud. No pottery shards, no bones, not a single thing. Just a layer of pure mud deposited by water. It was like a silent wall separating the past and the present. Woolley didn't believe his eyes. He ordered digging through that mud layer. And underneath, he found a different world. Beneath that silent barrier were completely distinct artifacts, different architectural foundations, different human remains, a civilization that had existed brilliantly and then was suddenly buried under that massive layer of water. Above the mud layer, the Sumerians were rebuilding. They were trying to mimic what was lost, but their clay tablets whisper something far more terrifying. The Great Flood didn't just kill humans, it wiped out their teachers. It wiped out them. The Sumerians were obsessed with the concept of before the flood. In their texts, before wasn't once upon a time. It was a specific timeline marker. It was the boundary between the era of the gods and the era of lonely humanity. The clay tablets recount that before the water came, this world did not belong to us. It belonged to species that walked, ruled, and taught, those who, after the waters receded, disappeared or abandoned us. Think about this. The Sumerians mapped Venus with a precision we only confirmed with modern telescopes. They knew about Earth's precession cycle, which lasts 26,000 years. 26,000 years. How could a civilization that just sprouted from the mud know about an astronomical cycle longer than the lifespan of the civilization itself combined? Unless they didn't discover it at all. Unless they were given the answer. Imagine walking into an advanced calculus exam. You haven't studied a single lesson, but you solve every complex equation perfectly. Are you a genius? No. You cheated. The Sumerians are that student, and the cheat sheet came from those living on the other side of that 2.5 meter thick layer of mud. Henry Rawlinson, the man who deciphered cuneiform in the 1850s, once uttered a quote for the ages, "It is as if we have discovered a vast library without finding the school where its authors learned to write." Exactly. There was no school. Because when you read the oldest clay tablets, those from the Uruk IV period, around 3200 BC, you don't see humans learning. You don't see scribbles practicing writing. You see humans memorizing. What is the difference between learning and memorizing? Learning leaves traces of mistakes. Memorizing starts in the middle of the story. And the Sumerian clay tablets start right in the middle of the story. They talk about Eridu, the first city, as if everyone knew where it was. They mention the 7 sages, Abkalu, without needing to introduce who they were. But when they describe these teachers, that's when things become disturbingly biological. They don't describe angels fluttering with pure white wings and saintly smiles. Oh no. The Abkalu are described with fish scales covering their lower bodies, human torsos above. Temple hymns call them Eridu, pure carp. They rose from the sea, walked on land, taught mathematics, agriculture, then dove back into the sea. The Sumerians insist. These were not people wearing fish costumes. These were actual aquatic beings. And the Anunnaki? They are described with elongated skulls, skin reflecting light like polished copper. And this detail is the money shot. They needed bread of life and water of life to sustain themselves. What kind of god starves to death if they don't eat? What kind of god needs supplies shipped from the shining place above? That is not a god. That is a crew, or a biological expedition team. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the king describes an encounter with one of these creatures. His body is covered in hair like a beast, yet he walks upright. His strength equals the strength of many men. These are physical descriptions, specific, detailed, not a shred of religious fluff. It's like the Sumerians were desperately trying to preserve the image of their benefactors or their masters before the memory faded. At night, when the museums close, I often think about those clay tablets. We call them mythology because the alternative is too terrifying. If we admit the Sumerians were telling the truth, we have to accept a truth that will crack humanity's ego. We are not the authors of history. We are just the inheritors. We arrived late to a party that was already over. The main guests had left or died in the Great Flood. We are just children picking up scraps of knowledge scattered on the floor and boasting that we invented civilization. But the biggest question remains, hovering like a ghost over the Iraqi desert sky. If those creatures, the ones with scales, wings, and copper skin, were really here, then where did they go? And more importantly, did they leave anything for us other than stories? Or did they leave their very selves? In the next part, we will dissect the creepiest physical evidence, the cylinder seals and the technology the gods used, things that shouldn't exist in the Stone Age. What do you think gods need? Prayers, incense smoke, blind adoration. That's what religion tells you. Gods are metaphysical entities. They live on faith, right? They don't need hamburgers or a new set of clothes, but what if I told you that the Sumerian gods had material, worldly needs that were ridiculously mundane? Look at the administrative clay tablets from the pre-dynastic period. Not Bibles, not poetry, but ledgers. That's right, accounting ledgers. The Sumerians were the most meticulous accountants in history. They recorded everything. And in that pile of dry records, we find invoices sent to the Abzu, the underwater palace of the god Enki. What did the list include? Food, textiles, handicrafts. Hey, wait a minute. Why do supernatural entities living at the bottom of the ocean need textiles? To sew swimsuits? Why do they need food? These offerings were not burned to send smoke up to the sky. They were physically transferred. This suggests a simple but earth-shattering truth. The recipients of the offerings, those dwelling in the Abzu, had physical bodies. They knew hunger, they knew cold, and they needed supplies from humans. It's like you raising a giant pet, or rather, provisioning a foreign military garrison. The Sumerians didn't feed symbols. They fed living entities. If the ledgers aren't convincing enough, look at the art, but don't look at the big statues. Look at this tiny thing. Cylinder seals. These are rollers made of precious stone, used to roll onto wet clay to create a signature. They are tiny, just the size of a thumb, but the detail is astounding. And most importantly, these are the most realistic images of life in the Uruk period. And what did they carve on them? Always the same scenario. Giant figures with non-human features interacting with tiny humans. Look at this guy, bird head, but the body is that of a strong man. What is he holding? A measuring rod and a coiled rope. Historians say those are symbols of power. Dead wrong. Those are construction tools. That is a ruler and geodetic cord. These bird-headed creatures aren't holding magic wands. They are holding technical tools. They are surveying land, planning foundations, directing the construction of temples. And who is beside them? Fish-human hybrids, standing upright, hand raised in a teaching posture. And the humans, kneeling and listening. For 5 centuries, repeat, 5 centuries, the Sumerians carved these images over and over again with absolute anatomical precision. Muscle structure, joints, wing position, how the fish scales layered. Why would a civilization be so obsessed with precisely describing things that aren't real? Or were they trying to draw exactly what they saw every day? Just like us taking a photo of the boss directing a construction site? Let's come to the most important piece of evidence, the Warka vase, dating to 3200 BC. A masterpiece. It divides the world into distinct tiers. Bottom tier, water and grain, the foundation of life. Middle tier, animals and naked men carrying offerings. Top tier, the VIP area. There, the goddess Inanna is receiving tribute. But look closely at those standing next to her. Tall figures, monstrous body proportions, unusually thin and long limbs, deformed heads. The museum caption calls them gods, but the Sumerians didn't call them gods. We have been deceived by translation. The word the Sumerians used was Dingir. We translate Dingir as God, but its literal meaning in Sumerian is not an invisible supreme being. Dingir depicts a star, and it means those who come from the shining place above, or more specifically, those who come from the sky. Not a metaphor, not a philosophical concept. It is a description of origin. Where do they come from? The clay tablets repeat 2 addresses. From An, sky space, and from Abzu, deep water. 2 origins, 2 types of creatures. Both arrived before humans. Both defined this world. The question for you today is, if the Sumerians just made up gods to explain thunder or crops, why did they complicate the issue so much? Why invent gods that know hunger? Why invent gods that bleed when cut? Why invent gods that mate with humans and give birth to hybrids? Mythology usually exaggerates perfection, but Sumerian files record biological flaws, physical needs, and mundane technical tools. They recorded the clothing measurements of the gods. They recorded the favorite foods of the gods. Unless they weren't writing literature at all. Unless they were doing the job of a dedicated secretary, documenting a superior species that once lived among us, those who used us, taught us, and then left us with unanswered questions. But the story doesn't end here, because if they were here, what did they do with our genes? And most importantly, why did they leave? Or did they never truly leave? Welcome to the 120 degree Fahrenheit, 49 degrees Celsius heat. Here, at the ruins of Uruk, the air isn't just hot. It's choking the life out of everything. In the summer, the heat warps the horizons, turning ancient cities into mirages oscillating between reality and illusion. Local guides say, if you want to hear the voice of the past, you must come here at dawn, when the heat hasn't yet struck, when the shadows still cling tight to the ruined ziggurats. That is when the clay feels closest, and that is when the silence becomes most deafening, the silence of abandonment. The wind here doesn't blow in gusts, it breathes. Long, patient breaths, grinding away what remains of a golden age. The question haunting me isn't, who were they? We have too many clues about scales, wings, and measuring machines. The question that truly makes me shudder is, where did they go? If they ruled, built, and turned humans from wild creatures into obedient workers, why did they abandon their project? Or did the Great Flood change the balance of power forever? The clay tablets suggest that after the water catastrophe, these gods became sparse. They retreated to the sky, or dove deep into the waters, Abzu. They left this world for a new species to manage. That is us. But look at who we are in their eyes. We are not beloved children handed the right to inherit the throne. We are like orphans, left behind in a house that is too vast, filled with tools and machines we don't know how to operate. We look up at the stars and draw maps, but we have forgotten the true path to get there. We calculate time in base 60, but no longer remember who set that clock. We call the Sumerian stories mythology. Do you know why? Because the alternative would shatter humanity's ego. We want to believe we are the pinnacle of evolution, that we found fire ourselves, invented writing ourselves, built civilizations ourselves. We want to be the first authors of the history book, but the clay tablets lying in those dark drawers whisper a different story. A story where we arrived late, where the first act of writing by humans wasn't creation, but a memoir. The Sumerians weren't writing poetry. They were desperately trying to preserve the image of their old bosses. Don't forget them. Don't forget the wings. Don't forget the scales. Don't forget what they taught. That is the message hidden beneath the cuneiform script. An effort to preserve the final traces before humanity sank into collective amnesia. Thousands of clay tablets still lie scattered under agricultural fields in Iraq, under the foundations of houses of people worrying about their daily bread. Each tablet is a shard of the truth. When the 19th century archaeologists found them, they thought they found the beginning of human intellect. Mistake. They found the end of another era. The Sumerians appeared with a mathematics so sophisticated it suggests not invention, but transmission. You don't naturally create differential calculus the moment you crawl out of a cave. You have to be taught. And if that teacher wasn't human, then we are much lonelier than we think. Let's rewind time to 1906. The setting is Nippur, a dry, dusty land where the heat could melt even patience itself. Hermann Hilprecht, a German-American scholar, is dusting off a clay prism. What is he expecting? A boring list of kings, names, years of reign, maybe some hollow flattery like the great king built this chicken coop. But no. What Hermann found was a slap right in the face of modern history. This document, which we call the Sumerian King List, tore human history into two halves, separated by a cold, concise line of text. Then, the flood swept over. Before that fateful line, everything becomes insane. Look at these numbers. Don't blink. The list records 8 kings ruling before the Great Flood. Total reign time? 241,200 years. You didn't misread. I didn't misread. 241,200 years. The first king, Alulim of Eridu, ruled for 28,800 years. The second, Alalgar, 36,000 years. Enmenluana of Bad Tabira, 43,200 years. If this were a Marvel comic, I wouldn't question it. But these are the Sumerians, the inventors of writing, the wheel and irrigation systems. They were humanity's first accountants, people obsessed with precision. What did modern scholars, with their usual arrogance, do? They smirked. They dismissed the beginning of the list and called it mythology. They said, "Oh, the ancients were just exaggerating, like how your grandfather tells stories about his walk to school." But there is a deadly problem here. The Sumerians didn't think so. In the same text, right after the line about the Great Flood, the list continues with kings having normal lifespans. The grammatical structure? Identical. The administrative style? Exactly the same. The seriousness? Unchanged. The Sumerians made no distinction between the divine era and the human era. To them, Alulim ruling for 28,000 years was a historical fact, as solid as the fact that you have to pay rent this month. If the latter part is history, then the former part is also history. You can't just pick what fits your textbook and throw away the rest. And it gets worse. Some names in the list aren't just kings, Lugal, or priests, En. They have the prefix Dingir. In the Sumerian language, Dingir is a warning sign. This is not a human. These are entities from elsewhere. Those who ruled while being gods. Take Enki, the seventh king. The text describes him being taken to the assembly of the gods to learn the secrets of heaven and earth. And the clay tablet coldly notes, his appearance was like that of the gods, not like that of humans. This is not a metaphor. This is biological distinction. But paper, or fired clay, will put up with whatever is written on it, right? You need physical evidence? Fine. Pick up a shovel. In 1929, Leonard Woolley, a hard-nosed Englishman, was digging at Ur, the city of ancient dreams. He dug deep, past the magnificent royal tombs, and hit something strange. A layer of water-deposited clay 8 feet thick, about 2.5 meters. Above that clay layer, exquisite Sumerian pottery, brilliant civilization. Below that clay layer, remains of a completely different culture, cruder, buried tragically, and in between, the silence of death. Woolley had found traces of the Great Flood, not a legend, but a real geological event that wiped out an era. Kish has it. Shuruppak, the hometown of the Sumerian Noah, Ziusudra, also has it. Something ended the old world, and when the water receded, the survivors had to start over from scratch. But wait, this is where things get truly dark history. At Eridu, the city dubbed the oldest in the world, archaeologists dug through that mud layer. They found 17 layers of temples stacked on top of each other. The deeper they went, the more ancient. And when they hit the bottom, the virgin soil dating back to 5,400 BC, they found things that shouldn't exist. Limestone blocks weighing tons transported from nearly 100 kilometers away without leaving a trace of technology. Flint blades sharp to a terrifying degree. Architectural techniques far exceeding the capabilities of the primitive farmers' history books describe. And most frightening are the foundation deposits. The later builders carved a chilling confession onto them. Restored according to the measurements left by the ancients. Rebuilt on foundations laid before the flood. They weren't creating, they were copying. A text from Babylon in the 6th century BC explicitly states, the architect used the original blueprints drawn by the god Ea before the floodwaters rose. Notice the verb, restore. You only restore what was lost. You inherit, you don't invent. So the question arises, if post-flood humanity is just heirs trying to piece together the fragments of a lost super-civilization, then who created that civilization? Who were the ones who ruled for 241,000 years? Who were the ones who drew the blueprints that humans only knew how to copy? The answer lies in a name the Sumerians whispered with respect and fear, beings who were not kings, not gods, but masters. Welcome back. If the previous part gave you a headache with numbers, this part will make your hair stand on end with images. We already know humanity inherited civilization. But who handed over the will? Imagine you are an ancient Sumerian farmer, standing by the shores of the Persian Gulf on a misty morning about 5,000 years ago. The still water suddenly bubbles. A massive dark shadow rises from the deep abyss. What do you expect? A crocodile? A hippo? No. The thing stepping onto the shore is every modern biologist's nightmare. The Sumerians called them Abkalu. The Akkadians called them Abkalu, roughly translated sages or experts. But don't let the name fool you. These aren't old men with white beards sitting in a library. These are amphibious creatures. The most detailed document we have comes from Berossus, a Babylonian priest living in the 3rd century BC. He wasn't writing fairy tales for children. He was compiling history based on the most ancient temple archives. And Berossus introduces us to the principal of this bizarre group of teachers, Oannes. Listen closely to Berossus's description because it is uncomfortably specific. Oannes has the entire body of a fish, but underneath the fish head is a human head, and underneath the fish tail are human feet. He has a human voice. He breathes air. And his work schedule is as disciplined as a machine. Early morning, surfaces from the sea, steps onto land. All day, teaches primitive humanity. Sunset, dives back into the sea and disappears into the darkness. He doesn't eat. He doesn't drink. He doesn't take a lunch break. I, Zorro, ask myself, is this a mythical creature or a description by a primitive person seeing someone wearing a biosuit? 2 heads? A real head inside a fake hood? Feet sticking out of a diving suit? What did Oannes teach? He didn't teach how to catch fish or weave nets. He taught mathematics, astronomy, law, urban planning. He taught abstract and complex concepts that humanity would have taken millennia to figure out on its own. Berossus wrote bluntly, "From that time, nothing further was invented." Let that sink in. Every foundation of civilization was installed into us by a fishman. Come on, Zorro, you say, that's just folklore. Really? Then explain to me the strange obsession of Mesopotamian art for 2,000 years. Look at the cylinder seals from the Uruk period, 3000 BC. What do you see? Figures with fish scales standing upright, holding strange objects that look like buckets and pine cones, purifying or instructing humans. Fast forward 2,000 years. Go to the palace of King Ashurnasirpal II in Nimrud, 9th century BC. On the massive stone walls, reliefs taller than real people loom large. It's still them. Still that fish head. Still those scales. Still that posture. Mythology tends to transform. Oral stories get distorted like a game of telephone. The green giant turns into a red dwarf. But the Abkalu do not. They are a constant. Whether Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, or Assyrian, through dozens of centuries of the rise and fall of empires, the image of the teachers from the sea remains exactly the same. Same body proportions, same attire, same role. Why? Because you don't change the design of something real. You memorize it. These statues aren't for decoration. They are guardians. The Assyrians believed that carving the Abkalu on walls would summon their ancient power and wisdom. They didn't worship the Abkalu as supreme gods. They respected the Abkalu as predecessors, the holders of the me. What is me? In Sumerian, it is the source code of civilization, the formulas, rules, and technologies that operate the universe. And the Abkalu are the key holders. The madness doesn't stop at art. It lies right in the administrative texts. A clay tablet from the Middle Babylonian period, 1400 BC, lists the names of 7 Abkalu like an Employee of the Month list. Oannes, he who finished the plans for heaven and earth. Oanneduga, he who is endowed with comprehensive intelligence. and Maduga, he who holds a good destiny. They are assigned to specific kings in the pre-flood king list we discussed in the previous part. King Alulim had the advisor Oannes. King Alalgar had the advisor Uwanaduga. This isn't poetry. These are meeting minutes. The text treats them as real individuals, with names, titles, and specific contributions, like medical manuals, divination techniques, metallurgy. And when King Esarhaddon rebuilt temples in the 7th century BC, he didn't say, "I built it my way." He declared, "I restored it according to the design that the Abkalu created before the flood." Not the design of gods in the sky, but the design of underwater engineers. Connect the dots. We have a king list spanning 241,000 years. We have a record of restoring the old world after a catastrophe. And now we have the identity of those who built that old world. Amphibious creatures possessing superior intellect, coming from the Abzu, freshwater abyss. But the story doesn't just stop at them teaching us how to stack bricks. It gets darker, because according to ancient texts, these Abkalu knew something humans were not allowed to know. They knew the measurements of all things. And when the Great Flood came to wipe everything out, one of them broke the rules to save us. Or rather, to save their data. Welcome to the apocalypse, or more accurately, the first apocalypse. We've had kings living for tens of thousands of years. We've had fish people professors teaching math. Everything seems to be going great for humanity, right? A golden age of knowledge and immortality. But in history, just like in Hollywood movies, nothing good lasts forever. Someone up high decided that this experiment needed to end. The Sumerian king list says one sentence that is chillingly brief. Then, the flood swept over. And this wasn't a summer rain shower. Let's go back to the pit that Leonard Woolley dug in Ur in 1929. I want you to really visualize that scene. Woolley is at the bottom of a deep pit. Above his head are thousands of years of history, trash, broken pottery, bones. But then, he hits a layer of clay. It is 8 feet thick, about 2.5 meters. It is completely clean. No pottery shards, no bones, no trace of life. It is a layer of mud deposited by water. A massive shroud covering the old civilization. Beneath that mud layer, a completely different culture. Exquisite hand-painted bowls, strange figurines, and then, boom. Mud buried it all. Woolley wasn't the only one to find it. At Kish, mud. At Shurapak, Ziusudra's hometown. Mud and destruction. Every location tells the same horrific story. A brilliantly developing civilization, suddenly interrupted by a wall of water. Modern archaeology says it was a major regional flood around 2900 BC. But for the Sumerians, it was the boundary between two worlds. The before world, where gods walked among men, where kings lived 40,000 years. The afterworld, where we live now, short-lived, fragile, and full of oblivion. So how did the king list continue after that line of death? How are we still here to tell this story? Thanks to a classified information leak. In the Bible, God chose Noah because he was righteous. But in the original Sumerian version, much darker and more pragmatic, the god Enlil wanted to destroy humanity because we were too noisy. That's right. We made so much noise he couldn't sleep. But the god Ea, or Enki, the god of wisdom and the deep waters of Abzu, the boss of the Abkalu, decided to pull a fast one on his brother. Ea wasn't allowed to speak to humans, so he spoke to a wall. He whispered to the reed wall of the house where King Ziusudra, or Utnapishtim, was staying. "Wall, listen to me. Tear down the house. Build a boat." And here is the key point I want you to notice: the technical specifications. EA didn't tell Ziusudra to build a raft. He gave a precise architectural blueprint. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the boat wasn't pointed at both ends. It was a cube, a sealed box. Why a cube? Because it didn't need to go anywhere. It just needed to float. It needed to survive a giant cosmic washing machine. And most importantly, the text says these instructions were based on the ancient knowledge of the Abkalu, who knew the measurements of all things. The Abkalu had disappeared, or returned to the Abzu, but their data, math, ratios, sacred geometry, was encoded into that ship. The boat was a backup hard drive of civilization. The water receded. Ziusudra opened the door of the cube. The old world was wiped clean. No more crystal cities. No more endless fields. Only mud. And this is where Sumerian psychology becomes interesting and painful. They didn't beat their chests with pride. We will build a new world that is better. No. They looked at the ruins and said, how can we restore what was lost? The entire post-flood Sumerian civilization was obsessed with the past. They were trapped in what I call the Inheritors' inferiority complex. Look at the temple foundation bricks. When they rebuilt the Itamananki ziggurat, the prototype for the Tower of Babel, what did they brag about? They didn't brag about a new design. They bragged that they found the original blueprints. I restored it according to the ground plan from before the flood, the design that Ea drew. They viewed themselves as clumsy masons trying to lay bricks according to the drawings of master architects who had vanished. They believed that all true knowledge, from reading stars to healing to making laws, came from the other side. We don't invent, we only recall. That is why the temples in Eridu are stacked 17 layers deep. They dared not move the location. They had to build exactly on the old foundation, where the Abkalu once stood, where the energy or technology still remained. But the final question, the biggest question, remains. If the Abkalu, the fish hybrid creatures, brought civilization to us, and if the first kings were not human, then who are we? Why does a brilliant civilization start with strangers and end with tiny humans desperately trying to copy past glories? Maybe, just maybe, the truth lies in our very biological origins, and that is the darkest secret the Sumerians left behind. We have immortal kings. We have a flood that wipes out the world. We have fishmen architects. But you might still ask me, Zorro, is it all just a coincidence or a rich imagination? To answer that question, we need to look at the crime scene. And the scene here is Mesopotamia around 3,500 BC. Look at the timeline chart. For tens of thousands of years, humans lived as hunter-gatherers, chipping flint and painting in caves. Slow, steady progress. Then suddenly, in a brief period of just a few centuries, around 3,500 to 3,200 BC, in southern Mesopotamia, everything exploded. We aren't talking about improving the stone axe. We are talking about a complete writing system, complex mathematics, the sexagesimal system we still use to measure time today, sophisticated metallurgy, the wheel, law, astronomy. Academics call this cultural development. I call this data download. How does a primitive society suddenly grasp such complex technologies all at once? According to the standard evolutionary model, this is like a toddler learning to walk and immediately knowing how to fly a jet. It's absurd, unless that toddler had an instructor. The Sumerians never claimed credit. They said plainly, "We didn't invent these things. We were taught." A text from Ashurbanipal's library lists the 7 clay tablets containing foundational knowledge. Each tablet is attributed to an Abkalu. The content? Not life philosophy. but technical textbooks. How to build temples aligned with the stars, how to calculate agricultural cycles, how to smelt metal, how to heal with herbs. This was a civilization starter pack handed over, and the ones handing it over were creatures that existed before the floodwaters drowned the old world. You want the ultimate physical evidence? Go back to Eridu, where we started. When archaeologists dug down beneath the deepest temple foundations, reaching the Ubaid culture layer, predating Sumerian civilization, around 5000 BC, they found things that made them shudder. They found a horde of small clay statues. They were not human. Look closely at their faces. Elongated heads, slanted eyes, large and bulging like reptile eyes, pointed snouts, shoulders overly broad, standing upright but exuding a non-human aura. Some statues are female, holding a child and breastfeeding, and the child has the exact same reptilian head. Conservative archaeologists tried to explain, maybe they are wearing ritual masks. But look at that body. Those proportions aren't of a human wearing a mask. That is a completely different anatomy. The most important thing, where were these statues found? They were buried carefully under temple foundations. They were created by hands before cuneiform writing was born. This means the memory of these creatures existed before stories were even written down. The Sumerians didn't invent the Abkalu to explain their origins. They sculpted what they remembered. They sculpted the teachers who once walked among them. Creatures looking like lizards or fish, possessing superior intellect and revered or feared to the point that their image became the most sacred talisman for the foundation of the first city. So, why does the first civilization begin its history with non-human creatures? The Sumerian answer is very simple, but too hard for the modern human ego to swallow. Because civilization didn't start with us. We are not the pioneers. We are the survivors. We are orphans, wandering the ruins of a greater, older world, ruled by entities we called gods, kings, Abkalu. The king list with 28,000-year dynasties is not a typo. It is the chronicle of a different biological era. The fishmen architects are not a fairy tale. They are the memory of an interspecies contact. The Sumerians knew their place. They were humble. They identified themselves as heirs. They spent their entire history trying to copy Ea's blueprints, to mimic the order of the Abkalu. And us? We look at those clay tablets and laugh arrogantly, calling it mythology. We pride ourselves on having built it all from zero with our own hands. Look in the mirror. What do you see? A masterpiece of creation? The pinnacle of evolution? A creature molded from the unconditional love of some almighty being? That is what schools and churches teach you. A beautiful, lulling fairy tale, that you are the center of the universe, that this world was built for you. But what if I told you the truth is much more brutal? That our existence didn't start with a divine snap of fingers, but with a labor strike? That we aren't God's cherished children, but scabs? Cheap workers created in a hurry to fill an abandoned production line? Today, we will peel back humanity's darkest file. We will return to Mesopotamia 4,000 years ago to read the technical minutes that people mistakenly call mythology. And believe me, this labor contract, you never signed it. Most religions start with nothingness, but the oldest texts of Babylon, specifically the Atrahasis epic, written around 1700 BC, start with a construction site. Forget the pink clouds and harps. The text opens with a world already running smoothly, but without humans. The ones living there were called the Igigi. History books translate them as lesser gods. But look at what they did. They didn't sit on thrones drinking nectar. They dug massive irrigation canals. They dredged the mud-clogged Tigris and Euphrates rivers. They carried heavy baskets of earth to build foundations for great temples. These aren't gods in the sense we understand. This is the working class. The text states clearly, for 40 years they suffered the work, night and day, under the direction of the greater gods, Anu, Enlil, and Enki. Imagine the fatigue accumulating over 4 decades, no days off, no unions, and then the last straw. The Igigi did what any oppressed class would do. They rebelled. They burned their spades, hoes, and work tools. They surrounded the temple of Enlil, the ruthless CEO of the Council of Gods. Their screams echo through the ancient clay tablets. The drudgery is too great. The forced labor is too heavy. We cannot go on. This is the first strike in the history of the universe ever recorded, and it led to your birth. Enlil, the supreme ruler, wanted to destroy all the rebels. But Enki, the god of wisdom and deep waters, or rather in this context, the chief engineer, made a cold proposal. He didn't suggest improving working conditions. He proposed replacing the workforce. Let us create a Lulu, Enki said. Lulu. In Sumerian it means one who is mixed, but in this context it implies a primitive worker, a biological creature designed specifically to shoulder the toil the Igigi had refused. Listen closely to the process Enki outlined. It isn't magic. It is biotechnology. Let a god be slaughtered. From his flesh and blood, let Nintu mix clay. Let God and man be bound together in that mixture. Enki didn't breathe a soul into dust. He was performing a genetic splicing procedure, mixing divine essence, their DNA, with clay, earthly matter, possibly the DNA of a primate available on Earth. Nintu, the mother goddess, or rather the laboratory director, executed the instructions precisely. She didn't pray. She mixed. She molded. She created the first 14 prototypes. 7 males, 7 females. The text describes this process like one tempers bronze. Do you temper bronze with magic? No. You need temperature, ratios, formulas, and precise control. Our purpose is stated clearly in the coldest line in history. Let man assume the drudgery of God. We weren't born to be loved. We were born to dredge rivers. If you still think this is just a fable, consider the language of these texts more closely. Sumerian hymns don't describe creation as instantaneous and perfect. They describe a process of trial and error. Some texts note that early human prototypes failed miserably. Some were infertile. Some were deformed. Some couldn't speak or hold tools. These are bug reports from a biological project. Only after many adjustments was the viable human version, us, put into mass production. And the scariest thing? The Igigi didn't disappear. The Atrahasis epic describes them still there, watching from above. They were retired. They looked down on us, the hybrid creatures, the replacements, breaking our backs doing the work they discarded. Class division was established right in our genes. One species up high enjoying life, one species down low working. We are a temporary solution to the gods' labor crisis. And like any mass-produced device, we have pre-programmed limitations. Short lifespans, disease, and dependence on superiors. When reflecting on this, a chilling question arises. If humans were created to replace the Igigi, then who did the Igigi replace? This cycle suggests a terrifying repeating pattern. Species designed to work, serve until exhausted or rebellious, then are destroyed and replaced by a newer, more obedient model. In the Enuma Elish epic, humans are again created from the blood of Kingu, another rebellious god. always the blood of the enemy, mixed with the soil of the lowly. Modern genetic studies of ancient Mesopotamia show an explosion of genetic diversity around 4000 BC. Science calls it migration, but Sumerian texts call it convergence. One species steps back, another takes over. Knowledge is transferred but not found by us. Remember Enkidu in the Epic of Gilgamesh. He was created from clay, lived wild with animals until he was civilized. He was a hybrid, stuck between two worlds, just like humanity. We have the ability to build civilization, but deep down, we carry the genes of a wild beast and the blood of rebels who were slaughtered. But if these were just stories on paper, I wouldn't waste time telling you. The problem is, the proof isn't just in dusty libraries. It is carved in stone. It is buried under temple foundations, and it takes a form, unlike anything you've ever seen in a biology textbook. Do you believe in aliens, or elves, or mythical creatures? Don't answer yet, because what I'm about to show you doesn't belong to the genre of science fiction. It is the forensic science of art history. If I draw a dragon and you draw a dragon, they will look different. That is imagination. But if artists spanning 2,300 years, from Sumer, Akkad, Babylon to Assyria, all draw the same creature with the same muscle proportions, the same bone structure, and the same type of feathers, then that is no longer art. That is an identification document. Welcome to the Zoo of the Gods. Let's take a walk through the Mesopotamian galleries of any major museum in the world. You will see a pattern repeating to the point of obsession. It is not human. It is entities standing upright on two legs, muscles rippling like bodybuilders. But the head is that of a bird of prey, eagle, or falcon. History books call them Abkalu, but look closely at the proportions. When they stand next to a human king in reliefs, they are always taller, not by accident. This ratio is fixed, 1.5 times human height, equivalent to about 8 feet, 2.4 meters. This is a strict design standard. Why? To remind us of our place. They are bigger, they are stronger. And what are they doing? They aren't sitting still to be worshipped. They hold pine cones, symbols of biological purification or pineal gland activation. They carry small buckets, what the internet jokingly calls designer handbags. They perform technical operations on the Tree of Life. These are technicians, guardians, the ones maintaining the system. They are working. And we, the tiny humans beside them, just stand there to receive instructions or blessings. If the bird-headed ones aren't enough to give you the creeps, meet the second group, the scaled ones. On a boundary stone from the Kassite period, around 1300 BC, we see an entity standing upright. His head is not human, skull elongated backward, eyes positioned on the sides. His body is covered in scales. But here is the detail that makes biologists frown: the distribution of scales. The artist didn't just carve meaningless triangles onto stone, tiny scales at the joints, elbows, knees, to allow flexibility in movement. Large, thick, overlapping scales on the chest and thighs for protection. Some wear clothes, some are naked, revealing clear biological skin texture. This is not armor. This is anatomy. The accompanying text calls them those who measured before the flood. They are the surveyors, the ones who set boundaries, the holders of real power before the waters rose. And now, let's talk about the wings. We often think angel wings are just symbols of ascension, but the Sumerians weren't that romantic. They were engineers. On cylinder seals from 2600 BC, the wings of Shedu or Lamassu entities are depicted like an aeronautical technical drawing. They clearly distinguish primary flight feathers for thrust and secondary coverts for lift. They describe exactly the connection point between the wing and the shoulder blade. The wingspan ratio matches body weight to be physically capable of flight. Why go to such lengths for something imaginary? Unless they were drawing what they saw every day. And here is the most important rule in Mesopotamian art: the 8-pointed star, Dingir. This symbol appears above the heads of these entities. It is the sign of divinity, of those coming from the sky. Human kings, no matter how powerful, never have this symbol. High priests never have it. Only the hybrids, the bird-headed ones, the winged ones, the scaled ones, are allowed to wear the Dingir badge. It is a cosmic-level racist ID card. They are Dingir. We are Lulu. The boundary is absolute. You might say, come on, Zorro, maybe they are just masks. Maybe priests wore bird masks to dance. I like your skepticism, but archaeology slaps a bucket of cold water on that theory. When people wear masks, you see straps. You see the connecting neck part. In Mesopotamian art, the bird face and human body connect as a single block. Neck muscles stretch naturally. No seams, no zippers. But the most damning evidence lies underground. In 1936, archaeologist Max Mallowan was digging at a temple in Nimrud, built around 800 BC. He found a pit burying small bronze statues depicting these hybrid entities. But when chemically analyzing the bronze alloy, scientists were stunned. This alloy did not belong to that era. It used techniques from the Akkadian period, that is, 1,500 years prior. Think about this. The Assyrians in 800 BC found these ancient statues. They recognized them as sacred. They didn't melt them down for weapons. They buried them carefully under the new temple foundation as relics. They were preserving memory. They were telling the future. This is the form of the old builders. Do not forget them. The question arises, if they were so clearly present, so numerous, and so powerful, where did they go? Why don't we see bird-headed giants walking on Wall Street today? Why are the scaled ones no longer holding rulers to measure land? The answer lies in the most catastrophic event humanity has ever recorded. An event that wiped the chessboard clean to start a new game. The event that both the Bible and Sumerian clay tablets tremble to mention. Do you know the fastest way to fix a computer with a system error? You don't sit there debugging every single line of code. You pull the plug, you hit the reset button, you wipe the hard drive, format. Human history has a reset button like that. We call it the Great Flood. But don't let Hollywood fool you with wooden boats and pairs of cute animals. The truth about this flood is not a story of salvation. It is a story of purging. And the target wasn't just humans. We all know the story. God got angry. Noah built a boat. It rained for 40 days and nights. But if you think the Bible is the only source, you are mistaken. Thousands of years before the Bible was written, the Sumerians carved this story onto clay. The only difference is the protagonist's name wasn't Noah. Sometimes his name was Ziusudra, sometimes Atrahasis, sometimes Utnapishtim. But the script is terrifyingly identical. The gods decided that the experiment on Earth had failed. The world was too noisy. The population was too large. Or perhaps the workers, us, had become difficult to control. The solution? Water. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes this devastation much more biologically than any moral sermon. When Utnapishtim released the raven after the flood, it didn't come back. Why? Because it found food. It found corpses. An entire world submerged in rotting flesh. That wasn't a spiritual cleansing. That was a planetary-scale crime scene. In 1929, Sir Leonard Woolley was digging at Ur, the city of kings. He and his workers were going through layers of history. pottery, weaponry, bones. And then they hit nothingness, a layer of perfectly clean clay, nearly 8 feet, 2.5 meters, thick, no pottery shards, no bones, nothing at all. Wooly was shocked. He dug through it and found what? A completely different civilization underneath. Above the clay layer, the Sumerians. Below the clay layer, a lost world. The separation was absolute. Whatever happened, it buried the old world under dense sediment and allowed a new world, our world, to grow on top of that grave. Modern geologists argue whether this was a global flood or not. Could it be a Black Sea dam burst? Could it be melting ice from the Zagros Mountains? But for the people living there, the scale didn't matter. The result was what mattered: extinction. And this is where the story gets truly dark. Recall what I said earlier. The world before the flood was not like the world after the flood. The Eridu Genesis describes a pre-flood world like a Star Wars movie. It was crowded and diverse. There were humans, Lulu. There were giant laborers, Igigi. There were bird-headed teachers, Abkalu. There were shining ones coming from the Abzu. They lived together. They ruled together. They taught and worked beside each other. But after that 8-foot layer of mud, silence. The Nipper text records a cold truth. After the flood, only those made of clay, us, remained in large numbers. The others, the mason gods, the bird-headed gatekeepers, they disappeared. Either they drowned or they retreated to their place. The Great Flood didn't just kill bad people. It was a mass extinction event targeting a specific ecosystem. It was like wiping out the dinosaurs to make way for mammals. The flood wiped out the higher entities and left the world to the cheap labor species, those capable of rapid reproduction and easy adaptation. That's you and me. We weren't chosen because we were elite. We are the survivors because we resemble cockroaches, small, numerous, and hard to kill. If the theory of evolution is a straight line going up, then Mesopotamian archaeology is a staircase going down. Look at Shuruppak, the hometown of the Sumerian Noah. When archaeologists dug down to the pre-flood layer, they expected to find the thatched mud huts of primitive people. Instead, they found engineering works that made them ashamed on behalf of later generations. Canals miles long, perfectly planned. Complex dike systems to control rivers. Fired brick architecture with bonding techniques that later Sumerians took centuries to relearn, or never managed to do again. No trial and error phase, no gradual development. Technology appeared in a perfect state right from the start, then was buried, and the survivors of the flood had to start again from zero with cruder tools. An ancient text describes a post-flood king trying to restore a temple. He didn't design it. He was trying to find the old foundation. Kingship descended again from heaven, the text says. But this time, it descended upon kings who were mortal humans, weak and short-lived. The age of giants and tangible gods had ended. The world after the flood is an orphan world. We inherited the ruins, the stories, and the tools we don't truly understand how to use. But is it true that all of them disappeared? Or did they leave something behind? A final blueprint? A clue lying deeper than the mud layer, at the very bottom of the first temples? We are often taught that human history is like building a house. Our ancestors laid the first rough stones. Our fathers plastered the mortar, and we, the modern generation, paint it and install the Wi-Fi. That is a nice story about progress, from caves to skyscrapers, from ignorance to wisdom. But what happens if, when you dig down into your foundation, you discover that your modest bungalow is actually sitting on the roof of a buried high-tech castle? Welcome to Eridu, where the truth is buried not by time, but by its own too perfect presence. According to Sumerian legend, Eridu was the first city, the place where kingship was lowered from heaven. Pay attention to the wording. Lowered, descended, not developed up. In the 1940s, archaeologists dissected the temple complex at Eridu like an autopsy. They found 17 layers of temples stacked on top of each other. At the top layer, the magnificent temples of the Sumerians in 2500 BC. They dug down, piercing through thousands of years of history, and when they reached the very bottom layer, Temple 1 and 2, dating to 5400 BC, what did they expect to find? A thatched hut? A pile of clumsily stacked stones by primitive people? No. They found perfection. Right at the virgin soil, where no human had ever lived before, the first temple rose with complete architecture. It was oriented precisely to the east, west, south, north directions. It used sacred geometric ratios. It was built with standardized mud bricks, a standard that people still used 3,000 years later. No drafts, no testing phase. It's like finding an iPhone in the pocket of a medieval skeleton. It didn't evolve from the telegraph. It was placed there. But architecture isn't even the craziest part. Look at what they buried under the foundation. The excavators found hordes of votive treasures, foundation deposits. At the 5400 BC depth, they found bronze tools. But wait, bronze at that time? Metal analysis showed an extremely sophisticated alloy ratio. To create this type of bronze, you need to control kiln temperatures precisely and know complex mixing formulas. According to textbooks, this technology would take another 1,000 years for humans to invent. One archaeologist had to exclaim in his diary, "It is as if someone else built the first temple, then left instructions." Who is someone else? The ones who taught us how to fire bricks? The ones who gave us the metallurgy formula? At Eridu, civilization didn't start with a small spark. It started with a big bang of knowledge, and after that, we simply maintained it. Or worse, we gradually forgot it. Let's move to Uruk, the city of King Gilgamesh. Beneath the famous White Temple, the foundation layer tells another terrifying story. The Sumerians built with mud bricks, because in Mesopotamia there is only mud. But the foundation of Uruk is made of limestone, massive blocks of stone weighing tons. The problem is, the nearest stone quarry is 60 miles, nearly 100 kilometers away. Imagine transporting these stone blocks across desert terrain and rivers in 3200 BC by people we assume had just escaped the hunter-gatherer life. No load-bearing wheels, no cranes. That's not all. The surfaces of these rocks are perfectly flat. Some even show traces of extremely high heat treatment to harden the surface, a stone tempering technique requiring industrial kilns. The report of the German archaeological team in 1930 recorded extreme confusion. Where did the builders learn these techniques? The answer, they didn't learn, they inherited. They built their temples on the remaining foundations of those who came before, those who possessed power and technology that humans could only dream of, or worship as magic. So what is the big picture? We are not the architects of this world. We are the tenants. We moved into a building that already had its foundation and drainage system built, leaving behind user manuals we call mythology. The Igigi dug the rivers for us. The Abkalu taught us agriculture. The gods spliced our genes to fit the job. Ancient texts don't lie. They just tell a truth our ego can't accept, that we are a hybrid species, created from the blood of rebels and the clay of the earth. We carry within us the Father's desire to reach for the stars, divine DNA, but are bound by the Mother's heavy legs, earthly flesh. The silence beneath the flood mud isn't emptiness. It is the grave of the teachers, the rulers, and perhaps our former masters. Mainstream history is like a financial report that has been thoroughly cooked. Every number looks beautiful, every timeline fits, and university professors can sleep soundly. But occasionally, just occasionally, some nosy guys with shovels dig right into the slush fund that someone tried to bury. And when that happens, what do? Do they panic? No. They do what any exemplary office worker would do: sweep it under the rug and pretend they didn't see anything. Today, we are going to lift that rug. First stop, Kish, the navel of Sumerian kingship. According to textbooks, this is where civilization began after the Great Flood. Everything is very neat and tidy according to the standard timeline. But then the 1920s and 1980s arrived. Archaeologists, with their naive enthusiasm, made a fatal mistake. They dug too deep. They pierced through the flood mud layer, the safety line where they should have stopped. And guess what? Beneath the place where there should be nothing was a battlefield of paradoxes. First, flint blades from 7000 BC. Fine, acceptable. But then they found tools made of obsidian. This type of stone doesn't grow in your garden. It comes from trade networks thousands of miles away. But here comes the punch in the face for these historians. A limestone foundation block. Carved on it are symbols that look exactly like proto-cuneiform. Sounds normal, right? The only problem is, it lies in a soil layer dating back more than a millennium before humans invented writing. It's like digging up King Hung's tomb and finding an iPhone 15 Pro Max charging. A time-traveling object? Or proof that we were more ignorant than we thought? So how did academia solve this hot potato? Did they hold a global press conference? No. They published it in a boring report that only bookworms would read, then shoved that stone block into a warehouse in Baghdad. Cataloged, but unexplained. Translated into layman's terms. We have no idea. Hide it before someone asks questions. And Kish isn't the only bastard child. Across Mesopotamia, this script repeats to the point of boredom. Beneath the glamorous shell of the Sumerians isn't dead clay. It is architecture, foundations, city walls, proper, solid structures, built by those who came before, those who possessed the technology that the later Sumerians simply copy-pasted. Do you know what the funniest thing is? The Sumerians never claimed credit for themselves. They were honest to the point of naivety. On steles, they wrote clearly, "This temple was restored according to the original plan," or rebuilt according to ancient measurements. A stele from the time of Ur-Nammu even blatantly states that the foundation of the Eridu temple was laid by the lords of old from the time before the waters came. While modern historians try to label the Sumerians as self-made geniuses, the Sumerians themselves are screaming, "Hey guys, we are just house repairmen." The blueprints were left by the old boss. So who is the old boss? Science says they were refugees from climate change at the end of the Ice Age. The water rose, they ran to the shore, bringing knowledge. Sounds very reasonable, very National Geographic. But ancient texts laugh in the face of that hypothesis. They don't describe groups of soaked people fleeing floods. They describe the Abkalu, entities stepping up from the sea, not to beg for food, but to teach. They taught humans how to measure, how to build straight walls, how to watch the stars. Look at the archaeological reality. The oldest temples have no testing phase, no crooked walls of amateurs new to the trade. Boom. Standardized bricks, precise orientation, perfect geometric ratios. That isn't evolution. That is a turnkey technology transfer. like you've never seen a computer, and suddenly someone throws you a thick Windows 95 manual. There is a possibility that academia is too scared to speak aloud, only daring to whisper in drunken parties. What if the foundation layer of the first cities wasn't built by humans at all? What if the Sumerians were just lucky heirs moving into the magnificent ruins left by another species? A species that vanished before we could name them. If humans didn't build that basement, then who did? If you think what lies underground is crazy enough, then fasten your seatbelt, because we are about to look up at the ceiling. And this ceiling, it holds secrets that make scientists want to bang their heads against the wall. Let's talk about astronomy. According to the normal laws of evolution, everything must go step by step. You see the sun rise, you learn to plant rice by season. Then after a few thousand years, you start calculating planetary orbits. But the Sumerians? Oh no. They skipped kindergarten and jumped straight to defending a PhD thesis. These are the Mul-Apin clay tablets, named after the opening phrase, the plow star. It is like the encyclopedia of the universe of the ancient world. It lists constellations, rising times, setting times, planetary movements, and even mathematical formulas to predict lunar eclipses. The accuracy? Phenomenal. Modern astronomers ran computer simulations and confirmed the Venus cycle in this document matches reality to the day. But here is the plot twist that keeps scholars awake at night. The scribes wrote these tablets around 1000 BC, but they noted very clearly in the margins, this is a copy. They weren't observing the sky. They were archiving data. They were copying source materials dating back to 2400 BC, or even earlier. Imagine Uruk and Ur back then were just towns toddlers stepping into existence. Yet someone sat there, tracking the complex orbits of planets over decades to create these charts. And to do that, you need mathematics, not the 1 + 1 = 2 type, but a bizarre kind of math, the base 60 sexagesimal system. Why 60? We humans count with fingers, base 10, or toes included, base 20. 60 is a freakish number, but it is God's number for geometry. 60 is divisible by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30. It is perfect for dividing circles, perfect for calculating coordinates, perfect for measuring time. That's why your watch has 60 minutes, thank the Sumerians. The problem is, this system appeared in Sumer instantly. No history, no primitive development phase. It's like someone custom designed an operating system specifically for astronomical calculation and installed it into the Sumerian brain from day one. So, who was the designer? Who was the programmer? The Sumerians never lied. They called those entities the Watchers, or those who measure the sky. A text passage from Nippur states bluntly, "The divisions of the heavens were established by those who came before the flood." They called planets the Wanderers. To map the paths of these wanderers, you need continuous observation over many lifetimes. The Sumerians said, "No, we didn't do that. The gods finished it and gave the results to us." God Enki, the god of wisdom, is described as holding the Tablet of Destinies, recording the paths of the stars from before kingship began. This knowledge wasn't a discovery. It was an inheritance. If you think they were just bluffing on paper, look at the architecture. The ziggurat at Ur, the temple at Eridu. They align with the sunrise and sunset on the winter and summer solstices with an accuracy of less than 1 degree. Do you know how hard it is to do that in 4000 BC? You can't just stick a stake in the ground and hope it's right. You need extremely sophisticated protractors. You need mathematical tables to convert observations into construction coordinates. But according to history books, Humans back then only knew how to use wooden plows and make pottery. So where are those precision tools? The answer lies on these tiny cylinder seals. Look closely. This isn't abstract art. This is a technical drawing. Non-human entities, Abkalu, holding measuring cords and geodetic rods. An Akkadian seal depicts a fish man holding a graduated staff, a ruler, pointing straight at a star. They were teaching us, not teaching philosophy or poetry. They were teaching trigonometry and geodesy. Hold this, measure this angle, build that. Don't ask why. But the peak of absurdity lies here. Precession. Earth wobbles on its axis. One wobble loop takes 26,000 years. The shift in star positions is so slow that a human lifetime cannot perceive it. Modern science only confirmed it in the 2nd century BC. But Sumerian texts? The Epic of Gilgamesh describes 12 cosmic ages, shifting counterclockwise through the zodiac. That is exactly the mechanism of precession. How did they know about a 26,000-year cycle when their civilization had only existed for a few centuries? There are two possibilities. One, the Sumerians were supermen capable of living thousands of years to watch the sky. Two, they received a data file from someone who had watched the sky long before humans knew how to write. The text says, "What they recorded remains in the sky, and the wise study what the ancients measured." Present tense. Measured. Past perfect. The job was done. If we believe the witness testimony, that is, the Sumerians themselves, then they are talking about the science of another species. A species that disappeared, leaving behind stone foundations underground and star maps in the sky. But the most stinging question remains. If they were so good, if they were so real, then where did they go? And why did they look like this? We've talked about unexplainable house foundations. We've talked about eerily accurate star maps. But there is a giant elephant in the room. Or rather, a monster in the water tank that we haven't dared to look straight in the eye. That is the question. Who did all of that? If you ask art experts, they will say, "Oh, the Sumerians had vivid imaginations. They liked to draw bird-headed, fish-bodied gods to symbolize the forces of nature." Symbolize? Metaphor? Mistake. The Sumerians didn't paint abstract art like Picasso. They were recorders. They were scribes obsessed with precision. If they recorded the amount of wheat down to the single grain, why would they fabricate the appearance of their rulers? Look at the HR file of these gods. For 2,000 years, remember that number? 2,000 years. The anatomical descriptions of them did not change. Still those entities. The cold falcon head, large wings folded behind the back, scaly skin or fish-mimicking attire, and always, in their hands, the mysterious bucket and pine cone. If this is just mythology, then why did artisans across dozens of generations with no contact with each other agree on a model detailed down to every scale? Unless they were drawing what they actually saw, or copying an official portrait that no one dared to edit. But the physical weirdness is nothing compared to their lifespan. Welcome to the Sumerian King List. This is their most important historical text. It lists the lines of kings, places of rule, and duration of rule. Modern historians happily accept later kings like Gilgamesh or Sargon. But when they read the beginning of the list, the pre-flood section, they stop smiling and start scratching their heads. Why? Because the numbers here are an insult to human biology. Alulim reigned 28,800 years. Alalangar, 36,000 years. A total of 8 kings reigned for 200 41,200 years before the flood hit. Academics call this exaggeration. They say the ancients made up numbers for fun, but look closely at the text. The names of these kings are always accompanied by the Dingir character, the sign of those coming from the sky. What if this isn't a typo? What if these teachers actually possessed a biology completely different from ours? A species whose concept of aging wasn't measured in decades, but in millennia. But the darkest story isn't about the kings. It lies with the working class. The Atrahasis epic, a document I recommend you read if you want to lose sleep, recounts that before humans, the gods were not alone. They had a working class called the Igigi. These Igigi were not humans. They were lower entities, existing before us. What was their duty? Digging canals, dredging the Tigris and Euphrates, building foundations, doing heavy manual labor to serve the high gods, Anunnaki, and then, what had to happen, happened. The Igigi couldn't take it anymore. They struck, they rebelled, they burned their tools and surrounded the boss's palace. The first-class revolution in the history of the universe. The gods panicked. They didn't want to work with their own hands. They needed a solution. They needed a new workforce. A species intelligent enough to understand orders, but weak enough not to be able to rebel. A species easy to breed, easy to replace. And so, we were born. According to Sumerian texts, humans are not the result of random evolution or a gift of love. We are the solution to a labor crisis. We are the replacements, scabs, for the Igigi. We were designed to shoulder the yoke that the previous entities had thrown off. This explains why cities, irrigation systems, and grand architecture appeared instantly. Because the blueprints were already there. The tools were already there. It was just that the old workforce had been fired or destroyed, and the new workforce, you and me, was brought in to keep operating the machine. So what is the big picture? The city of Kish? Built on the foundations of the Igigi/Abkalu era. Astronomical knowledge, copied from observational data of those with lifespans of tens of thousands of years, the only ones with enough time to track precession. We didn't invent civilization. We inherited it from a vanished species. A species that left foundations, left instructions, and then, wait. The most important question. If they were so powerful, if they lived so long, why did they disappear? Why are only we, the tiny hired hands, left ruling this planet now? Did they leave? Or were they wiped out? The answer lies in the most catastrophic event human memory still retains. The event that every culture mentions with ultimate terror. And then, the water came. Not a summer rain shower. Not a Mekong River flood. This was a planetary-level extinction event. A giant reset button pressed down by the hand of nature, or by the very gods who were fed up with this mess. In Sumerian texts, history is cleft in two by a brutal scar, before the flood and after the flood. When the water receded, the world had changed completely. Those kings who lived for tens of thousands of years, gone. Those rebellious Igigi, washed away. The glittering crystal cities of the Golden Age, buried under meters of silt, the very layer of soil that archaeologists at Kish had to dig through to find those absurd foundation blocks. But the most terrifying thing was not the destruction. It was the silence that followed. The great teachers, the Abkalu, the entities that taught us how to stack bricks and read stars. They no longer ruled directly. They retreated into the shadows. They became legends. And they left us, the bewildered surviving humans, with a massive but dangerous inheritance. The Sumerian king list contains a sentence that chills my spine. After the flood, kingship was lowered again from heaven. Lowered again. Pay attention to the wording. The operating system crashed, and someone installed a backup. But this time, the version was downgraded. The kings after the flood no longer lived for 30,000 years. Gilgamesh and Mabarajesi, they began to die young, like us. The divine presence faded, replaced by priests and human kings trying to mimic the glory of the past. This is the key to decoding the Sumerian mystery. Why did this civilization appear suddenly and completely? Why did they know about precession in the solar system? Why did they have timeless construction techniques? The answer isn't aliens in the style of cheap Hollywood movies. The answer is much more tragic. We are merely eating what was prepared for us. The Sumerians were not genius inventors. They were diligent heirs. They were children living in the abandoned house of a dead civilization, trying to operate the machines their fathers left behind, reading instruction manuals they only half understood. We didn't build the basements at Kish. We built on top of them. We didn't draw the constellations. We copied the maps of those who had gazed at the sky with non-human eyes for millennia. And like every heir, we gradually forgot the source of the fortune. We started claiming the credit for ourselves. We call it human achievement. But deep within the cuneiform texts, in the whispered prayers at Eridu, the truth still lies there. We do as the ancients measured. The story of Sumer is not the story of the rise of humanity. It is the story of a transfer of power. Where did the old owners go? Did they die? Did they leave? Or are they still watching us from the stations of the stars they established? Whatever the answer, one thing is certain. The foundation beneath our feet is older than we think, and the sky above our heads holds secrets we are only just beginning to spell out again. Look down at your feet. If you are standing in Eridu, considered the first city of humanity, and you start digging, don't just scratch the surface. Dig deep, through the dust of the Sumerians, through the debris of Babylon. What will you find? Clay? No. You will find foundations. Archaeological excavations, real digs, not leisurely strolls, have revealed an ironic truth. Beneath the cities considered the beginning, there existed structures even older than that. The temples at Eridu date back to 5,400 BC. Let that number sink in. 5,400 BC. Before the Sumerians supposedly invented civilization, someone was already there, stacking every brick, erecting every pillar. And it's not just bricks and stones. At Kish, we found anomalous tools. Why do I call them anomalous? Because they predate any known settlement by 1,000 years. It's like finding an iPhone in the pocket of a medieval skeleton. It doesn't belong in that timeline, but it lies there, stark, defying all logic. Then comes Uruk. The construction technique here doesn't look like the product of amateurs learning the trade. No signs of trial and error. No leaning walls of apprentice architects. It was perfect from the start. As if they had inherited a user manual from someone. Expertise that was transferred, not developed. But the thing that chills me the most isn't the stone, it's the numbers. The Sumerian sexagesimal mathematical system, base 60. The thing we still use to divide an hour into 60 minutes, a circle into 360 degrees, appears in the historical record, fully formed, complete, no history of primitive development. Think about this. Mathematics is a painful process. You count fingers, then you draw marks on a wall, then you invent arithmetic. But in Sumer, advanced mathematics appeared like an uninvited guest, dressed in a sharp suit and knowing how to solve equations immediately. Star catalogs were copied from sources older than Sumer itself. Astronomical clay tablets preserve knowledge attributed to the measurers before us. Who were those measurers? The Sumerians never hid the answer. They didn't beat their chests claiming, "We invented it all." No, they were humbler, and also much scarier than that. They look straight at us across 5,000 years of history and say, "We did not create this world, we inherited it." They believed they coexisted, learned from, and finally took over the world from preceding species. And please, don't use the word mythology with me. When the Sumerians described these teachers, they didn't use vague metaphors. They didn't talk about beams of light or abstract spirits. They described physical entities with specific anatomy, bone, flesh, blood, with specific roles, engineers, astronomers, rulers, with specific knowledge to transfer. This isn't religion. This is administrative record-keeping. To a scribe in Uruk, recording a king list that included non-human entities ruling for tens of thousands of years was as normal as writing a daily shopping list. Abkalu, Anunnaki, the giants. To them, those were neighbors, bosses, university professors. The Sumerians insist, we are not the first ones. We are the latecomers, picking up crumbs of knowledge from the giants' banquet table. But then, a silence fell. If they were real, if they built the foundations at Eridu, if they taught us how to look up at the stars, then where are they? Why do you and I stand here today, alone on this planet, wondering about our origins? Why are we the sole survivors? To answer that question, we must go to a dark time, around 2900 to 2700 BC, the time geology calls the era of massive flood sediment layers. And me, I call it the crime scene. Because after that timeline, everything changed. The teachers disappeared. The pre-flood kings became legends. And the world became very, very quiet. What the hell happened? We are standing at the timeline of 2900 to 2700 BC. If history is a videotape, this is the part where the tape gets static. This is when the signal cuts out. Before this timeline, Sumerian records spoke of non-human entities in the present tense. They are here. They teach me this. My king is a giant. But after this period, after the thick flood sediment layers blanketed southern Mesopotamia, the tone changed abruptly. It was no longer "they are doing." It was "they used to do." The Abkalu were mentioned with nostalgia. The pre-flood kings became distant myths, the shining ones, the entities from the sky and sea. They faded away. They were still invoked in temples, but like absent patron saints, no longer active participants in running the world. What on earth happened in that mud-filled 200-year gap? We have 3 theories, and believe me, none of them have a happy ending. But let's start with the most devastating, bloodiest possibility. Possibility number 1, extinction. Every Mesopotamian tradition is obsessed with the Great Flood, but please forget the image of Noah's Ark with cute pairs of giraffes. The original Sumerian version is much darker. It wasn't a rain shower, it was the end of species. Read the Eridu Genesis. This text says one cold sentence. After the flood, kingship had to descend from heaven once again. Do you understand the implication here? If the previous holders of kingship were still alive, why send kingship down again? It implies the old rulers were wiped out. No one was left there to transfer power. Then comes the Epic of Gilgamesh. Utnapishtim, the sole survivor, described the flood not like a natural disaster, but like a battle, a total attack to destroy every living creature. When the water receded, he released birds. For what? To find land? No, to find life. And the birds returned because they found nothing. He looked out and saw only corpses covering the water like a raft of logs. The language here suggests a biological catastrophe, not just a political collapse. It didn't just destroy buildings. It wiped out entire populations, entire lineages. There is a fragment found at Nippur, a lamentation text that makes my hair stand on end. It writes, "The world before the water knew many forms of wisdom, many shapes of life. After the water, only one form remained to carry the burden. Many shapes of life." Let that phrase sink into your brain. And after that, only one remained. It's us. Science stands on the side of this hypothesis. Geological evidence confirms the period of 3,500 to 2,700 BC was a climatic nightmare. The Persian Gulf coastline changed, cities drowned. Now, let's do a simple biological math problem. If these teachers, the Abkalu, the Anunnaki, already had small numbers, if they were just a small elite group, living concentrated in coastal areas where they supposedly emerged from the sea, or highland peaks, then a widespread disaster is an absolute death sentence. Extinction doesn't require you to kill the very last individual immediately. You just need to reduce their numbers below the viable breeding population level. Once you go below that threshold, mathematics does the rest. Genetic bottlenecks, disease, isolation, and then puff, gone. A species with a few hundred individuals scattered across flooded valleys could be completely wiped out in just one season of catastrophe. Meanwhile, humans, us, the tiny creatures reproducing fast, huddling in every nook and cranny, survived, like rats surviving after the dinosaurs went extinct. Painful, isn't it? Yes. We are survivors not because we are smarter or stronger, but maybe just because we were more numerous and luckier. But wait, not all bodies were found. Ancient texts say some of them didn't die. They did something else, something even more suspicious than death. They left. Possibility number 2, they abandoned us. Sounds heartbreaking, right? Like a child left by parents at an orphanage with the promise, Mom and Dad will be right back, but they never return. Many ancient texts don't say these teachers drowned. They say these entities checked out of Hotel Earth. The Abkalu, after finishing the lesson plan for humanity, returned to the Apsu, the watery abyss. Some pre-flood kings are described as having been taken away to live with the gods. Remember Enki and Enlil, the two bosses of the Sumerian pantheon. When the floodwaters rose, they didn't panic and swim looking for life preservers. They retreated to their own domains. Enki to the underwater palace, Enlil to the high mountain peak. This is the logic of survival. If these entities truly possessed the superior astronomical knowledge we attribute to them, if they knew how to calculate the precession cycle of the equinoxes, if they understood the rhythm of climate catastrophes, then they certainly predicted the flood. They weren't surprised. They were prepared. An Akkadian text describes the post-flood world as a place where the divine beings retreated to watch from afar. They no longer walked among the children of clay. Perhaps they returned to their true homeland, lands now submerged under the sea bottom. Or perhaps they boarded ships, not wooden ones like Noah's, and left. Their disappearance from the archaeological record isn't extinction. It was a tactical evacuation. Their presence in Sumerian memory is just the trace of a close encounter that ended. They left the house keys to us and said, "Good luck, kids. Don't burn the house down." But, hold on. There is a third scenario, a more intimate scenario, and in a way, much more haunting. Possibility number 3, assimilation. Look in the mirror. What do you see? A human or a hybrid creature? Sumerian creation mythology always says humans were created from clay mixed with divine blood. We always treat that as flowery metaphor. But what if it is an accurate biological description? Clay is indigenous earth matter. Divine blood is alien genetic code. Look at Enkidu in the Epic of Gilgamesh. He was created by the goddess Aruru from clay, strong as a beast, but human enough to befriend a king. He is a transitional form, not entirely wild, not entirely divine. A hybrid, and don't forget the Book of Giants. These rejected texts tell of the Watchers who fell in love with human women, and the result of these illicit affairs? Hybrids, giants, super intelligent, but bound to the earth. If this mating happened over many generations, the original purebred species would disappear, not because they died, but because they were diluted. They dissolved into the massive gene pool of humanity like a small drop of ink into a large glass of water. The ink color fades, but the water is never clear again as it was before. Their knowledge, the me, the divine knowledge that Sumerian priests craved, might not be something learned from books. It is genetic memory. That is why Sumerian kings always beat their chests claiming divine lineage. Maybe they weren't bragging. Maybe they really carried within them segments of the genetic code of those who came before. The Sumerians believed they inherited the world. But perhaps what they inherited actually lies right in their blood. However, all three hypotheses we just discussed, extinction by natural disaster, voluntary withdrawal, or assimilation through love, all share one thing in common. They all assume a natural or peaceful departure. But history is rarely peaceful, and the Sumerian gods, oh, they were not messengers of peace. There is a fourth possibility, a possibility darker than all others, a possibility that explains why the traces were wiped so clean, why the silence is so terrifying. What if the Great Flood wasn't an accident? What if it was a deliberate reset button, a planetary-scale murder case? The fourth possibility, and this is why I told you to hold on tight to your chair, deliberate erasure. Look back at the texts. Don't skim. Read every single word carefully. The stories of the Great Flood, whether the Eridu Genesis, Atrahasis, or Gilgamesh, never describe it as a random accident of Mother Nature. There is no low atmospheric pressure caused heavy rain. No. It is always framed as an administrative decision, a sentence. The Council of Gods met. Enlil cast his vote. The other gods, though reluctant, agreed. They decided to send the water down to end the noise of the surface. You see, nature doesn't vote. Nature doesn't plan. Only higher intelligences do that. What if the flood myth is preserving the memory of a planetary-scale war crime, a calculated genocide event? Pre-flood history is not a nursery rhyme. It is full of violence. The texts hint at constant conflict. The Igigi rebelled and struck before humans were created. Enuma Elish describes Marduk slaughtering Tiamat, tearing her body apart to construct the world. Sounds like mythology, right? But look at the specificity of the violence. Blood spilled, bodies dismembered, factions exterminated. If Mesopotamia at that time was like a cramped cage containing multiple intelligent species coexisting, giants, Abkalu, Anunnaki, and humans, then resource conflict was inevitable. Who controlled the water? Who controlled the land? Perhaps the flood was the final solution, a way to clear the chessboard and play again from the start. Just like when your computer has a severe virus, you don't fix every file. You format the hard drive. And who was the virus? Who was the one wiped out? Maybe unwanted hybrid species. maybe dissidents and humans. We were just the tiny creatures lucky enough to escape through a narrow crack, or kept to be labor for the new world. And after the storm was silence. This is the most painful part of the script. A clay fragment found at Uruk, heavily damaged, contains a sentence that makes anyone who reads it shudder. When the water receded, we looked for the teachers. We called to the sky and the depths, but no one answered, only the wind and silence. Therefore, we built with what they left us and tried to remember. Can you feel that despair? The loneliness of a species suddenly abandoned. The Sumerians inherited the world in confusion. They recorded everything they remembered. They carved the shapes of the teachers on stone for fear of forgetting their faces. They copied astronomical measurements even if they might not fully understand the principles anymore. They built ziggurats, temple towers, mimicking sacred mountains, trying to imitate the technology of those who went before. They were like children trying to wear the suit of a missing father. It was baggy, but it was all they had. Now, you will ask me, Zorro, if this is real, where is the proof? Why don't we find giant bones or spaceships in the mud? The cruel answer of reality. Time is a perfect eraser. Organic bodies decompose extremely fast in the humid environment of Mesopotamia. Bones dissolve in acidic flood sediments. Genetic traces, if any, have been diluted over 5,000 years of interbreeding to the point of being unrecognizable in our modern genome. And more importantly, the deepest architectural layers, where the answers lie, are currently deep below the water table. We cannot dig there. We are walking on graves we can never open. But the Sumerians left a black box for us. Thousands of clay tablets, hundreds of king lists. They screamed across time that we are not alone. This world used to be more complex than that. So why do we deny them? Why do our history books wipe these first chapters clean? Maybe because remembering is dangerous. Maybe because admitting we aren't the first and only pinnacle of evolution hurts humanity's ego. The truth might be hard to swallow. We didn't rise due to unique intelligence. We rose due to inheritance. We are the great scavengers of history, surviving after the true masters of the House of Earth left or were destroyed. The wind still blows through Uruk, carrying sand that was once brick, once bone, once the promise of the gods. The Sumerians wrote the truth down knowing that one day, skeptics like me and you would read it. Maybe humans aren't the first ones. Maybe we are simply the first ones to forget. I am Zorro, and this is Dark History. See you in the shadows.